Hey, Rebecca, do you want to start sharing your slides, Rebecca, while
Sure.
I introduce you? Yeah, so Rebecca, Dr. Rebecca Upsher is from King's College London, and is a lecturer in psychology with a focus on education. She's done work on student mental health, and has used the research to inform practical teaching guidance for students at universities as well. So she's a really good example of a researcher who's doing the research and using that to underpin actual improving practice in higher education. And so this speaks to what she's going to talk to us about today. So Rebecca's been involved in kind of this intervention research in higher education, and she's developed checklists to improve reporting in education intervention research. So that's what she's going to talk to us about. Okay, I'll hand over to you, Rebecca. So we've got an hour session, and we can have some time at the end for questions and comments and things, if that's okay.
Wonderful. Thank you,
Thank you so
Louise.
much.
And thanks everyone for joining me this afternoon. And hopefully this is a nice break from all your marking tasks. I mean, Louise has wonderfully introduced me already, but just to give a bit more context of where I'm coming from with this. So I'm a lecturer in psychology education at King's. I mainly teach on the undergraduate psychology programme. And I also have a deputy personal tutor role within the programme. So I design the curriculum for our tutorial sessions, but I'm supervising students from undergraduate through to PhD level. My role is split. I'm teaching as well as researching, but for me, there's a massive Venn diagram there. So my main area of research interest is improving student learning and wellbeing through the curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. More recently, I've got very interested in generative AI and what that looks like in higher education. And I'm also a University Mental Health Charter Award panelist, which I will come back to later if we have time. So today I want to talk to you about, yes, reporting in education intervention research. But before I do that, it'd be great to get a bit of context from you. What I'll do actually is I will post that in the chat if I can do it smoothly. And then if I'm changing screens, can you see that? So can you see my Mentimeter screen now? Or do I
It's
need to
now
stop?
off. It's now come out of the present
Okay, let
mode. It's
me
just in the
stop
PowerPoint
share.
slides now.
What I'll do is I'll stop and start
Okay,
again
yeah.
so we can see the screen okay. But if you can take some time just to answer that one question on the Mentimeter, that would be great. And we'll just see just where we're at today in terms of what you're here for, what you're doing. So in your setting, are you reporting? Are you designing? Are you evaluating? Are you peer reviewing? Maybe something else, maybe nothing. You're just here to listen and see what happens. We're getting some mixed responses already. Okay, so a few of you interested in reporting, designing and evaluating, and a few of you doing some other things as well. Okay, wonderful. If you've done the something else and you're brave enough to share in the chat, I'd be intrigued to see what the something else is. But a range of things here. Okay, that's great. So what I'll try and do when I'm talking about these checklists is link back to these things. Mainly I'm referring to the reporting, but the checklists can also be useful for these other things as well. So if I don't make that clear, come back to me and I'll explain more. So let me go back to my slides. Thank you for doing that. It's always just good to see where everyone's at and what everyone's here for. Can you see my slides again? Okay.
We can see the PowerPoint, but it's not in present mode. Yes, now it's in present mode.
Wonderful. Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to talk you through two new checklists that we published last year. So it was published in February 2025 that are designed to support researchers in writing up education intervention research. So this manuscript walks you through two checklists. So there's the CLOSER checklist and the CIDER checklist. Now, the CLOSER checklist is one that guides you through sort of journal manuscript writing from abstract all the way through to the discussion. And this checklist can be, applied with any educational setting and any quantitative study design. So what I'm doing in this slide, I'm just giving you a higher level overview of the checklist, and I'll go into more depth in a second. And the CIDER checklist, now this one is more to help describe the intervention itself, and making sure, we understand the components of the education intervention so that we can replicate or try out and adapt in our own context. So this checklist is a bit more flexible, so you can use this in any study design, qualitative, quantitative, or even if you're just writing up a case study report. And actually, people have spoken to me about using the CIDER checklist to help design interventions as well, because you can kind of map out all the different features, and also use it for things like evaluating other people's work, or if you're doing a peer review of a intervention, then you can kind of have this checklist next to you to see whether they've reported all the essential items of an intervention. My quick tip for this manuscript is not to read it start to finish, but actually to go to the tables first. So the tables will map out each item of both checklists, so you can see it there as an overview. And then if you don't understand what the item is, or you want more information, that's when you can kind of dig into the manuscript, and we give an explanation and an example of each item of every checklist. So it's a long manuscript for that reason. So that's why I advise looking at the tables first to see the checklist in full. Please do share these checklists, and if you want us to talk about this at any other event, let me know, and we'll see what we can do. So this sounds a bit random to start with, but I promise you this links into how I got to developing these checklists. It actually, for me, started with the Education for Mental Health project. So this was a toolkit that was published in 2022, and it's a free resource available on an Advanced HE website. And this toolkit was created for academics and curriculum developers to help outline strategies to support student wellbeing and learning within curriculum assessment and pedagogy. So the resource is here. It's funded by Office for Students, and was a collaboration between Derby, King's, Aston and Student Minds. So to create this toolkit, we did a range of things. We synthesized existing research. We did our own research, involved different stakeholders to put this together. Now, in doing so, my role was to, one, synthesize existing research, but also do some other new research as well. But what led to kind of the idea behind the education checklist was actually the systematic review. So we did this review of interventions that are embedded in the curriculum to improve university student wellbeing. And we initially became quite frustrated with some of the publications, and the way things were reported was very inconsistent. I'll show you this slide here. So this is a list of some of the issues that we encountered when we were reading through some of the papers that were included in the review. And there were things like no indication of sample size. There was often sort of quite poor reporting of statistical data, and missing information, missing context, things like demographic information, often quite poor descriptions of interventions. So, some papers would say something like, we delivered a mindfulness intervention, and you'd sort of be left thinking, okay, great, but who delivered it? What was their experience? How many sessions were there? What did that look like? You were sort of a lot of missing information about what interventions look like. And also things like lack of fidelity assessment, so thinking about how well the intervention was delivered. So we saw a gap here in sort of the quality of reporting in education intervention research, and thought, actually, do we need some tools to help support this? So this is where this project was sort of born and why we were very keen to do this. So that led to the creation of the CLOSER and CIDER checklists. So what I'll do is I'll walk you through kind of our methods for getting to the creation of the checklists, and then we'll have a look at the checklists themselves and hopefully have a little time to give you a chance to look through it and dig in a bit more. So 3 stages for creating these checklists. The first stage was an initial tool adaptation. So those of you who are more familiar with health research might be thinking, well, these tools exist already. We have like the consort guidelines, we have tidier checklists, but they're very health research intervention focused. And actually, if you try and apply them in a education context, say you're describing a teaching intervention, for example, they don't exactly translate, and sometimes it's actually quite difficult to kind of think about how they apply, especially if you're not from a health research background, you're not used to kind of these existing tools. It's actually quite confusing. So, but they were a very good starting point. So in terms of the reporting education intervention, the consort checklist was a good start. So this is, if you're familiar with this is used in health research to report randomized control trials. So we wanted to create something similar for education research. So that was the CLOSER checklist of standards of reporting in education research. Here's the sort of parameters of this checklist, because it is different from the consort checklist. So, in terms of participants, can be students from any educational setting. In terms of intervention type, sort of any curricular or extracurricular intervention provided by an educational institution. In terms of comparator, it could include any control group or no control group, and any sort of quantitative outcome. The major difference being that we wanted to be flexible with study design. So the consort guideline is only for RCTs, whereas we were very aware that a lot of education research isn't randomized controlled trials. Many people don't agree with RCTs in education research. And when they do, it sometimes is not that feasible. So lots of different study designs in education research. So we wanted a tool that could be used across quantitative study designs, and cross-sectional studies included within that as well. And then there's the other checklist for actually describing education intervention components themselves. So in health research, you might be familiar with the tidier checklist. So this helps break down the kind of components of an intervention itself. Again, this was a really great starting point for us developing one in education research, but wasn't entirely fit for purpose in terms of different interventions in education settings. So this is a CIDER checklist, the checklist for intervention description of education research. I took great joy in finding acronyms for these 2 checklists. I remember sitting down with a notebook trying to figure it out, pre-ChatGPT days as well. So it was really pen and paper to think of these. I'll go through what the items look like in a bit. What I want to do is kind of outline our methodology for getting to the checklist first. So bear with me. So we had that initial tool adaptation. That was myself and Anna Nabili from University of Derby sat down and did that together, that kind of initial logical, these tools exist already in health research, let's see if we can translate them to education. We then put an expert team together to kind of really rigorously go through those adaptations and take it sort of to the next level. So our team looked like this. There's myself, Ellie Dommett, Nicola Byram, and Sophie Carlisle from King's. We had Anna Nobili and Jerry Codine from University of Derby, and Sarah Connor from TASO. And we had a mixture of psychology expertise there, education, focused academics, and a real mixed methods expertise as well, which was really important for this project. And we met, we sort of had some, I guess, focus group style kind of sessions where we were just breaking down both checklists, thinking about the language used, thinking really carefully about what we wanted to see when we see like things reported within a manuscript, but also kind of thinking about how an intervention is described and what information we would need to kind of try out in our own context and replicate in research if we wanted to. And once we've been through that, I mean, we had two pretty decent checklists, to be honest. You know, it felt like we could have stopped there, but we wanted to take this a step further, and consult further as well outside of our team. And this is where we did a Delphi study. So what we did here is present the items of both checklists to participants. They could rate each item quantitatively from omit all the way through to essential, and they could also give some qualitative feedback on the item as well and give us feedback there. Now, our participants were mainly people from or editors from different education journals. So that's how I kind of reached out. I took kind of the top education journals and emailed the editors, co-editors, to see if they would take part in our study, as well as, you know, sort of the usual posting on LinkedIn and maybe Twitter at the time, as a few years ago. So kind of recruiting different people with education intervention expertise. We wanted people who were very familiar with education research and you could sort of comment on, you know, what this should look like, and kind of promote good reporting. So we had 28 participants in the first round of Delphi. I'm going to be very honest here and say I was quite naive about going into this process, about what this would look like. I thought everyone would pretty much agree with us, give some feedback, but not too much. And, you know, these checklists were nearly there. What happened was this was like having 28 peer reviewers comment on a manuscript. And I'm sure you all know what this looks like. You know, when we have two peer reviewers comment on our manuscripts, it's a lot of work. This was 28 people commenting really rigorously on the different items. And, you know, it helped us kind of pull it apart, reorder things to make things logical, make sure the language was precise and made sense, and they were so generous with their time because it was an unpaid, unfunded study, so we couldn't pay them to take part in this, but you could tell some people had spent hours kind of going through and just really carefully thinking about what these checklists look like. So we were so grateful for that, and it was really helpful. In our initial expert team, we had Jerry Codine from University of Derby, who was so helpful. So she's an expert in education research. She's not sort of she doesn't have a psychology background. And we really worked carefully to think about, like, she labeled it as bridging silos. So thinking about kind of, you know, in psychology, we're quite used to being, well, we're sort of trained in like rigorous reporting and how we look at statistics and this sort of thing, whereas other disciplines aren't. So it was kind of thinking about a way of kind of breaking this down and being able to communicate to people from a range of discipline backgrounds, a range of methodological backgrounds as well, so that anyone who's teaching can look at these checklists and be a bit more confident about reporting, was the idea. And this Delphi process really helped that, to get that feedback. So what I was able to do is kind of take all of that feedback from that first round of the survey, implement it, make adjustments to the checklist and what they look like. I then produced a report and took it back to our expert team to discuss and approve these amendments. And then we ran with the same participants. So 19 of the participants came back for round 2, which was pretty good rate. And I summarised the amendments for them. And then they were presented with the newer version of those checklists to say whether they agreed or not of its inclusion, and a final opportunity to sort of say why they agreed or disagreed, and any final feedback. So that led us to kind of the final versions of the two checklists. So yeah, I mean, this is why this project took 2 years, because we had these three, well, basically 4 different steps that led us to our final checklist. So just to give you a quick snapshot of what these look like. So this is the CLOSER one. So this is the manuscript reporting for quantitative study design. So you can see this is just a screenshot of the first part of it, but reporting from the abstract all the way through to the discussion. So you can't have the CLOSER checklist without having the CIDER checklist. So you can see item 5A actually says, please refer to the CIDER checklist. So that's the part where in the manuscript where we want people to talk about the intervention and what the details of the intervention itself. However, the CIDER checklist can be used independently. People can use this for, writing up a case study of an intervention, for an example. So this is, where if you want to report an intervention and describe all the details and the features, this is where you can kind of come to. And again, yeah, this people have spoken about how they've used this to help design interventions, to evaluate, and also to kind of peer review as well. So, Louise, sorry, I didn't ask you in advance. Do we have the capacity to do breakout rooms, or should we just have an overall discussion? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
Okay, yeah, but potentially. I mean, I wonder, given there's so fairly small number of us, whether we could just have a general discussion. Do you think that would work?
Yeah, that works. So what I'll do, let me get up the activity. I'll probably have to stop sharing and reshare again. And I can put it in the chat as well. So this just kind of helps think through the checklist, really. What I'm going to do is I'll put the link to the activity in the chat. We've actually published this activity on Open Science Framework. Sorry, my brain froze for a second there. So feel free to use this activity elsewhere if you'd like to. But let me share it on the screen too. So I've taken this to conferences before as well, but basically what we do is present this case study. So a very short description of an intervention. We ask people in groups to kind of give their initial impressions of that description and say, what's missing here, or what's good about it, what's missing, are there any other details that you'd like to see? And then kind of get people to compare it against the CIDER checklist so they can really see, how the checklist supports them in kind of reporting. So I don't know, do we want a few minutes just to do that? Maybe in the chat you can quickly read this case study, the Wellbeing Wednesdays, and just in the chat say what initially, without looking at the CIDER checklist, is missing for you. What would you like to see in order to be able to replicate this intervention?
But I'll just pause the recording as well, and then if people would rather comment without being recorded, then that might be easier as well. Helpful. I'll do that.
Thank you.
Yes, so I had a question. So I think it's like all the detail about the intervention is critical for someone to be able to replicate it and understand what it is. My main question, and I guess this is kind of as a journal editor with that hat on, is the number of words it would take to describe the intervention itself within a paper that's also describing a study to evaluate the intervention. It's almost like you almost need two separate papers almost. So Do you have any like advice or thoughts about that and how that works in terms of word count?
Yeah, absolutely. We make some recommendations within our manuscript that describe the CLOSER and the CIDER checklist. So a few things that we say. One is that you do not have to follow this checklist in this order. This does make logical sense, but when you find that you're writing things up, you'll see there are overlap between things. So it's not like, so with cider, what do we have? 11 items here. It's not like necessarily you need to make 11 separate statements. There will be overlaps, so that naturally reduces. We do make other recommendations, such as, making use of supplementary materials. Maybe you'll write a brief description within the manuscript itself, and then elsewhere kind of write something more in full, but also make use of tables. So sort of using the CIDER checklist as kind of headings for a table, for example. That's often used with the tidier checklist in health research, for example. Another idea recently kind of that I've been doing is writing up almost like a case study and publishing it on the open science framework. So doing that first, where I'm, rigorously describing an intervention. And then when I write my manuscript, I can write a really brief kind of statement and say, link out to the open science. But I don't know if anyone else kind of uses any other repositories that they like to use, but that's one that I've sort of been recommended and that I've started to use.
The open science framework makes sense. Has anyone else actually in the group actually reported an intervention before or kind of had experience of doing this? Well, not yet. No, there was a few people who were wanting to write one up. No.
I've done a couple, but they were extracurricular and they were basically randomized control trials. So we reported as such. There was in the method section, we were able to put like a paragraph to say the content of each part of the intervention. But it was just like, this is what we talked about, not a whole lot of details.
Makes sense. What I'll do is I'll switch back to my slides. So this is a very quick overview of the CIDER checklist. This is a type of activity. If we had more time, we could kind of sit and go through in detail. An optional step 3 for this activity is that I've created a GPT that a customized GPT that sits alongside these checklists to kind of help writing up as well. But as with everything AI, it's important to kind of have that checklist next to you whilst you're doing it, because it can sort of make some mistakes. But I've given an idea for a prompt there if you want help in using that GPT. Okay, let me reshare my slides, and then we can have a chat. But so hopefully that was useful to give you some context of what the checklist looked like a little bit. This is me kind of just being a bit outside the box, but a quote from Nelson Mandela: "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." Probably not supposed to do this, but this is me extending the quote to say, therefore, please share your educational practices and report them diligently. My kind of vision for this work is sort of helping people report standards in education, and sort of help enhance evaluation of these interventions too. I think it's, when we're talking about our interventions and sharing our teaching practices, for example, whether that's within the curriculum or extracurricular stuff, we want to inspire each other. We want things to be used in different disciplines. And we can't really do that without telling people, sharing good quality kind of descriptions of what we're doing. And hopefully if we're all sort of more on the similar page in how we do this, then this ultimately will help to improve outcomes for students and educators. I think when we're talking about health research, you know, we're looking at almost exact replication, you know, when you're talking about drug trials and that sort of thing. But actually, when we're thinking about teaching interventions, it's not about exactly replicating something, because it might not make sense in our context, but we still need to understand other people's contexts and what they've done in order to be able to adapt things. So it's still important to report things well. I got the link to the manuscript there, and also the OSF link to the GPT that has the activity there as well, if you want to use that. So please do use these things. Let us know how you're using them. We're really interested to know how it's helping people, or if you know, if there's any improvements we can make, then we're interested in that also. So feedback is important to us as well. Just to quickly mention that I have the special interest group, the Education for Mental Health Special Interest Group. So we meet monthly to talk about how to support student wellbeing and learning within the curriculum. So if you're interested in joining that group, I can add you to the email list. So just ping me an email and I'll add you to our email list for that. And I'll stop talking now so we have time to chat and ask any questions or feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was so useful. And yeah, the rigor behind this checklist is really outstanding in terms of like how you phrased it as 28 peer reviewers effectively. I mean, that's if you haven't covered everything, then I don't know how you could, but that seems really helpful. And I'm currently in the middle of kind of trying to report an intervention, so I'm definitely gonna use your checklist. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's really helpful. Would anyone like to ask any questions of Rebecca? Or even just say whether how you're gonna use the checklist, what you're writing up at the moment.
I found recently it's quite useful for even undergraduate students if they're in their final year doing a project and they need to report something. Yes. It's quite useful on PhD students.
Thanks, Rebecca. I thought that was really useful, really helpful. And I'm just linking in with you now. I've been running an NAPP project for supporting students who are experiencing trauma for about 4 or 5 years, on and off. And it's kind of coming to an end. And we keep saying we're going to write it up, and we just keep doing things. So that was, for me, really helpful to go, here's a route. Thank you.
Great. Well, good luck with the write-up.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to ask anything? I think what's really self-explanatory and really helpful. We've got a tool here that even if we're not going to directly use it ourselves, as we said, it might support us with helping students as well, with student projects. Anka?
So what I found really interesting is that you highlighted the disciplinary differences in reporting. So when I'm a member of the Society for Research in Higher Education, and I'm often surprised by what to me as a psychologist looks like reporting that leaves me with more questions than answers. And so these checklists, to me, they feel really psychology. They feel really, they have that sort of rigor that we're trained into. How have you found, like, do you get questions from people who are not coming from that background? How do they engage with us? How can we support this, like, beyond our discipline, our disciplinary expectations? I know it's a really complicated question, but I'm just curious.
No, it's a great question, and you know, this is something that we had with the first round of the Delphi feedback. And actually some of the comments were outrage that we would even suggest, you know, doing an RCT in education research. And that wasn't from just one person. It was a few who were very much in a qualitative space, who that was the only methodology in their eyes in terms of education research. So it was about finding, we had to be very careful about framing the manuscript, because we weren't saying you should do quantitative research, you should do RCTs. I think that's a separate kind of discussion, and we this wasn't about suggesting which methodology is right or wrong. This was about saying, if you're going to do quantitative research, please report it with some sort of standards and quality, I suppose. So that's one thing that jumped out at me when you asked that question. But yeah, it was a challenge, and I wonder whether we will encounter further challenges with the language used. We were very careful in terms of who we approached and trying to broaden out who we were sort of collaborating with and getting feedback from. But yeah, it's probably not perfect. I think the CIDER checklist is probably more digestible than the CLOSER checklist, because the CLOSER checklist is just for quantitative study designs, whereas the CIDER one, is reporting of the intervention itself, so it can be used within any study design. So yeah, I expect any sort of criticism perhaps to come from the CLOSER checklist, and that would be interesting just to see how we can improve things further. So I don't know, it's not a straight answer, I'm afraid, but we did our best to be inclusive and include a broad range of people to mitigate these things, but I'm sure
I think that was a very straight answer. It really does address my concerns, because I mean, as I said, I was surprised at in what supposedly is the same society, the variety of how people approached these questions. And I've been thinking about educational research in the context of my professional doctorate students who are doing clinical doctorates, and they have to do reviews using PRISM and using the checklists there, that a lot of educational research will just fall out of the bottom of. So being able to say there's another tool that might help you evaluate this in a more appropriate way for the discipline or for the kind of research we're doing, I think is really useful from my perspective. So thanks for sharing.
And that's an interesting comment, actually, because for full transparency, we originally had 3 checklists, and the third one was a risk of bias tool for education research, but that became very complicated, and we felt like we needed to pick that up at another point separately. So if anyone has any huge interest in risk of bias assessment for systematic reviews, I think there's a gap there as well, as you say. These tools that are very nicely created for health research just don't fit for education research in many cases.
Thank you. I've just put in the chat a couple of links. One that links on from what you're saying. If you are doing quantitative research, me and some colleagues wrote an editorial recently about how to sort of start and improve quantitative research from a beginner perspective, about some of those pitfalls. So if you're interested in that, but also I've put a link to a quick form to tell us what you want from TFUN in 2026. So we're having a planning meeting next week to think about what we're going to offer through TFUN for next year. So please give us, if you've got any ideas or thoughts about what would really help you from this forum, then please let us know. So there's a link in the chat to that. But otherwise, I think we'll finish it there and just say a huge thank you, Becky, for your really informative talk. I'm going to print out your checklist and put it on my desk next to me while I'm writing my next paper. So thank you so much. You've and as we've heard from others, I think it's really obviously going to have an impact and improve reporting of education interventions, which we really need. So thank you. It was really helpful. There's one more message in the chat. Yeah, some thanks in the chat too. All right, thank you so much, Rebecca.
Can I ask you a question, Louise?
Yes.
That's with your journal editor.
Yeah,
hat
sure.
on.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the ideal for me with these checklists would be that, you know, journals start saying, you know, in the author guidelines, please use these checklists.
Yes.
Is that something that you feel is a good route to go down, or are there any ways that anyone could recommend sort of disseminating these checklists?
That's a really good question. Let me talk to I'll talk to our editor-in-chief actually, because that is a really good question. I mean, I don't know, in terms of some of the more long-standing checklists that already exist, how do authors know about those? I'm just wondering whether
This is where I've seen it. I mean, definitely in health research. So my PhD actually was in health psychology and diabetes research. So I've changed fields. But yeah, there was in a lot of health based journals, you know, it was, you have to use the consult guidelines, you have to use Prisma checklists if you're doing a review, that kind of thing. So you do definitely
and it says that in the journal guidance.
In the author guidelines, some are very strict, especially with systematic reviews. They're like, you can't publish here unless you've used the Prisma checklist. So you know, I'm not suggesting with journals at this point be that strict with these new checklists, but maybe an encouragement.
Yeah, but why? Yeah, well, why not? I mean, it would be worth going to some of the, for example, the British Journal of Educational Psychology editors, and just see what they say. But I think and groups like the education section of the BPS, for example, you know, often these big groups like the Society for Research in Higher Education, they all have their own journal. So like studies in higher education.
It's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, going through the bodies might get a broader reach than just trying to find individual journals, perhaps.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I put you on the spot there by asking you a question.
No, that's okay. Yeah, no, I think that's the way forward, because what we're really trying to, so the link to the journal article I sent you is for the Journal of University Learning and Teaching and Learning Practice, which I'm an editor for. And we're just doing everything we can to try and improve the quality of what we get submitted. So things like this are amazing. If I can say, look, I'm rejecting this, or this needs major revisions because please use this checklist, that makes my job easier, because I then don't have to say what's missing. It gives them the template to use. So yeah, it makes our job easier, so we can refer them to it. Yeah, so I'll bring it up with our journal editor-in-chief. Oh, where can we access? It's through the paper, Rebecca.
I'll put the link in the chat. And I can share the slides with you, Louise, if you'd like to.
Oh yes, please. Yeah. And then if it's okay, we can put this on our YouTube channel.
Sure.
Brilliant. Okay. We'll finish there, shall we? Thank you all so much for coming. I hope it was really useful. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for your time. Really appreciate it. Okay, have a good day. Bye.